Hello and welcome back to the Cinch YouTube channel, where today we're behind the wheel of another Dacia Jogger, but this, unlike the one we drove last year, is a hybrid model, so it mates a petrol engine and electric motor together to promise more efficiency and a bit more power. Now in this video, we're going to put both of those things to the test, and we are really going to test the miles per gallon. We're going to go to the extreme to see how high it can go, and for a bit of fun, how low it can go as well. And we're also going to test out how the practicality of this thing is affected. But before we do that, if you haven't already, check out cinch.co.uk or download our app before you browse for your next car. We've got loads of machines on there, including lots of Dacias, hybrids, electrics, and everything else in between. Right, let's drive the car. Now, as you can see at the front of the Dacia, it's pretty sharp. We've got our new Dacia logo on the nose and these headlights with these LEDs. It looks pretty good, but otherwise this is an unashamedly practical car, and that's really clear at the side and at the rear where most of the space is. Now, under the bonnet of this hybrid model, we now have a 1.6 litre petrol engine to work with the electric motor. So Dacia claims over 56 miles per gallon combined. That's pretty good. Sounds a bit diesel-like to me. And it also promises to hit 62 in about 10.1 seconds and top out just over 100 miles per hour. It also has an automatic gearbox in this car, unlike the base model, which means it should be easier to drive as well. So, behind the wheel of the Jogger, it's a familiar affair to me. I drove the fully petrol car last year and I really liked how practical it was. Find the link in our description to that video or click the link on our screen. You can see how much I really loved how just practical and to the point that car was. And of course, this is very much the same, but it is almost £5 more expensive than the starting price for the entry petrol manual car. That car has a small petrol engine and a manual gearbox. This car has a 1.6 litre petrol engine and an electric motor powered by a battery, and it comes with a 6-speed automatic as well. So it's quite a different proposition, one that suggests it could be a lot more affordable to run day to day when it comes to fueling, and a lot easier to drive with the auto. Now the key thing and the big difference is, as you can probably hear, I'm now stopped at a red light and the engine is off. Now that would be true for a start-stop petrol car, of course, but it's always the case in this car at low speed. Now, I drove out of London to where we are today, and I have to admit, I did use very little petrol in town. I really felt the engine was off for a lot of my cruising through traffic. And now, while I'm at this red light, everything is off. The air conditioning is still blowing nice and cold air. All my systems are still on, but I'm not using not even a drop of petrol. But now, when I put my foot down, I can feel the electric motor doing the heavy lifting. And then if I accelerate a bit harder, very seamlessly, and that's actually very impressive given that this is a budget car. The way the petrol engine comes in is so nice and seamless. Dacia obviously uses technology shared with its parent company Renault, and well, that definitely helps in ensuring that this doesn't feel budget when it comes to the powertrain. But I have skipped ahead of myself here. Let me get back to the basics. I said that this car starts at just under 5k more in hybrid grade than the base level car is. Now you're looking at almost £23,000 for this car as it sits here in expression trim, but you could obviously spend closer to £18,000 for the very entry level Jogger. So is it worth spending the extra money to access that hybrid performance? Well, initial impressions are very good indeed. Where the other car needed to be worked quite hard, this one, it doesn't need to be worked at all, really. The hybrid motor does enough heavy lifting at low revs, so this thing feels properly zippy. So if I'm going from 40 here, I'm accelerating onto a 60-mile-an-hour road, put my foot down, there's a real kick up the backside of electric, and then the petrol engine comes in. So a big thumbs up when it comes to an improvement in performance. But what really matters in this car, and of course, this being Dacia, being a value brand, and this being a big family car with 3 rows of seating, well, fuel economy is where it's at and why this car has this setup. So I'm going to do an economy run in this car. We're just getting onto a dual carriageway, and we're going to see how this thing fares when I reset the trip computer and let it just average out its best fuel economy. And then just for the fun of it, I'm going to see what the lowest fuel economy is that I can get. I'm going to use as much fuel as I can and to see how low this thing will go. I don't think it's going to go very low, but it's going to be interesting to see. First though, let's be sensible. All right, so we've been on the motorway now for about 5 minutes, sat at 70 miles per hour, and it's settled at around 55 miles per gallon, which is really good actually, because we are doing motorway speeds, and obviously combined fuel economy, it's pretty much where it needs to be according to the paperwork. And combined fuel economy, normally you have stints where you're driving slower when they're doing that measurement. So this is really good. In fact, it's gone to 57.8, 58 miles per gallon now. I think we're slightly downhill. But you get the idea. This thing will happily cruise in the high 50s when it comes to miles per gallon. Right, okay, now let's see how much fuel this thing will drink when it's being worked really hard. No one's behind me, foot to the floor. pretty nippy, this actually. That electric power is really effective, but the petrol engine still has to work quite hard in this kind of scenario. Right, here we are up to the national speed limit. Right, let's slow back down again. I'm going to drive as inefficiently as I can. Right, foot to the floor again. Wait for that readout to show us a number. 17 to the gallon I just got there. That was foot to the floor, working as hard as possible, and it still averages 17 to the gallon. That's not too bad at all, is it? So the number falls as low as the teens, but actually, I mean, as soon as you settle in at the national speed limit, it just wants to go way into the 30s again. It's really hard to make this thing drink fuel. All right, so enough about the powertrain on its own. Let's talk about how the car feels and rides altogether. It's very good. It rides nicely. I mean, these joggers are basic in setup. You don't have any adaptive suspension. There are no buttons to press on the dash to change the way it feels. There is an eco button, but this car is so economical as standard. All that does, to me anyway, is just makes the accelerator pedal less responsive. It encourages you to drive slower. But fundamentally, you just get this car in one way and one form, and that is a good thing. It's simple. You don't need to think about it. Comfortable over bumps. So these aren't big wheels. These are steel wheels with hubcaps on, despite what they look like. They look like alloys in this Expression model, but actually they are a hubcap. You have to pay more and go to the extreme grade above to get alloy wheels, but it doesn't matter. You're still on pretty narrow tires. There isn't tons and tons of wind noise actually, which I'm quite surprised about. It's pretty good, and the insulation is better than you would expect, but I can hear on this coarser surface a bit of road noise. Not surprising though. This car is deliberately light on specification to be affordable. It steers well as well. I mean, the steering itself is quite slow by modern standards. Most cars now are pretending to be sports cars even if they're not, but this Jogger isn't doing that at all. It's very happy to be a practical family car, and so the steering responses are, I would say, not slow, but certainly not fast. It's where you want it to be. It means it's very easy to drive actually. Brake pedal as well, it's got really strong brakes. I've not tested them super hard, but it's definitely really good. And of course, this is a big car. It's really long and it is relatively wide. It's not wider than your Dacia Sanderos by much or anything like that, but you've got that big tail end there, which gives you all the practicality of this car. And I have to say, it doesn't feel that big to drive. You're helped by the fact that it has a reversing camera, which actually helps you guide the car when you're in reverse. And also the visibility is great. You sit quite high in this car. I've actually got the seat as low as it will go, and yet I can see over the bonnet. My mirrors are nice and big. They're big, chunky mirrors. Even the view through the rear window, which is quite far away, because that rear window is so flat, I can see really clearly and I know exactly where the rear of the car is. And of course, as I said, you've got parking cameras and sensors as well all around the car. So it's really, really easy to drive, even if you're a nervous parker. Now, you do get in this Expression trim quite a few handy standard fit pieces of equipment. Now, firstly, you've got your infotainment screen in the middle, not the biggest, and I must say the standard Dacia menus are a little bit confusing and clunky. You get used to them, but far from the best in the class. But it doesn't really matter because you get Android Auto or Apple CarPlay in this system as standard. So once you plugged in your phone, you can just emulate it on the screen. And that's what the vast majority of us do these days anyway. You also get a digital instrument cluster ahead of you, which is nice and sharp. The graphics are crisp and clear, and I actually quite like the display as well. And very clearly displayed is your fuel and also your electricity. So you can see how much petrol you got in the tank. You can also see how much electric you have as well. Now, this is a standard hybrid, which means you don't need to plug it in. It will charge itself as you go along. You can put it into a more efficient mode. There's a B mode under the D, which basically means it will work harder to keep that battery topped up. It makes the car more efficient, and it makes the car's battery, the electric battery, last longer. So it does mean actually you just drive this thing like a normal automatic, which is perfect for what this car's designed to do. And then suddenly you realize the engine's barely on, and somehow you've always got a bit of electric juice to help you out. Now, when it comes to safety, this thing does feel very safe. It feels secure on a road. It's a big car. As I said, you sit up high. It feels commanding. Even in the back seats, which we'll test out in a second, you do feel like you're in a nice solid structure. It's got an SUV-like feel to it. But when you look at the safety rating, well, it doesn't score very highly there at all. It's one of the worst actually in the class, but that's not really necessarily fair, because this is of course a cheaper model, and so it doesn't get features such as some pedestrian safety features which are there to prevent you from bumping into pedestrians, stuff like that. it leaves you to do the driving and doesn't help you out as much in those areas. And also you don't get airbags in the back of the car. So passengers in the rear haven't got airbags like they have in other more expensive cars. Although those in the front, we are protected quite well. We've got airbags all around us, so that's pretty good. But yeah, if safety is your main priority, then perhaps this isn't gonna be the car of choice for you. But for everyone else who's just happy to be in a high up car where you do feel pretty secure on the road and you've got great visibility, and of course you feel safe because it is a pretty chunky car, I think that rating isn't gonna matter so much. So inside this Dacia now, as I said, it's a nice thing to drive, and actually just sitting in it, it's pretty good as well. It's not the most comfortable place to sit because the seats are pretty basic, but actually everything is where you want it to be. The digital stuff, as I mentioned, is really good, and actually the fit and finish, while okay, there's a lot of rough and cheap materials around, everything feels extremely honest, and that was true in the petrol model as well as this higher grade hybrid one. So where in other cars you might see leathers or at least plastic leathers, in this car you've got just fabric. They've been pretty honest about that, but it looks cool. And actually on places that you touch a lot, i.e. the gear knob and also the steering wheel, everything is nice and ergonomic. It's just comfortable. It needs to be what it needs to be. It keeps that price down, and it means this interior is actually pretty tough. You've also got good amounts of storage space as well. There's cup holders down here, you've got storage down here, and decent side cubby holes as well. And you've got storage under the armrest over here as well. What's it like in the back, Sam? Well, despite this being a hybrid model, unlike other electrified cars, you don't actually lose anything in the way of practicality inside. So in the rear, I've still got a good amount of space. I said this is a big car, and it really does feel big when you sit in the back of it here, because I've got decent legroom ahead of me here, and yet I've still got a massive boot behind me there with another row of seating. When it comes to actual equipment though in the back, well, you are a bit short, aside from the light above you and a 12-volt port down there, which you can put an adapter in for a USB port. Yeah, you haven't got much in the way of equipment. Some pockets in the seats ahead of you, but otherwise it's good space, and I can prove that when I get into the middle seat as well, because this seat does feel wider than your average car, and because I don't have a big tunnel below me in the floor, it means my feet aren't pushed out wide. I can get pretty comfortable in here. Of course, you're not going to want to do a longer journey sat in the middle, but it isn't bad at all. And actually, the rear isn't too bad either. Now, as far as sitting in a boot is concerned, this has to be one of the most comfortable ones I've ever tried. Not that I've tried many. Firstly, not only are these seats actually quite wide, you can get two people in here quite comfortably, but there's actually all right leg room. The knee room isn't great, but I can tuck my feet under the seats ahead, so it means I can actually fit, despite being a fully grown adult. Now, I also have an armrest, so does my passenger, and we've both got cup holders as well. And the one on the left even has a 12-volt port, so you can plug in, for example, an adapter for a USB. So you're not completely left out in the back here. It's fairly comfortable. So for a kid, it's actually not too bad in here. Although, of course, having people in here does sacrifice on boot space. You've only got a tiny amount of room in the back there. But if you've got no passengers, there is one way to make a lot more room, and I mean a lot. So, of course, as you can see, this interior is fully modular. You can take out this back section entirely and fold the front ones forward so they rest it up against the very front seats. Or, of course, you can have half of the seats in. It's up to you, whatever the purpose. This is easily one of the most modular and usable interiors of any car, and it's not affected by the fact that this is a hybrid. So the Dacia Jogger remains an excellent car, but in hybrid form, it now no longer feels very budget. I mean, the standard petrol car was extremely practical, but when you put your foot down, it wasn't exactly quick. This thing now is actually quite nippy off the line, and on the motorway, it settles into a cruise very easily indeed. With the auto box, it feels like a very usable car, but then you've still got all of that practicality, and as we saw, it just doesn't like sipping fuel. The miles per gallon are so very good in this car. So if it comes to tax and you're looking out for how much you visit petrol stations, this thing is really good, and yet it can seat the whole family. I'm super impressed. And of course, don't forget, this thing starts from about the same price as some hatchbacks, and yet it's a 7-seater. And if you think about monthly payments, well, I think it's £2,500 you put down as a deposit, and you're paying less than £300 a month. That's pretty competitive. I am a big fan. If I had a family, I'd be very much considering this car. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to click the subscribe button and of course, like the video as well. See you soon.